I never thought about it not starting.
This morning, when I looked at Swanton's temperature, it was at 11 o'clock. It was minus 11 with a wind chill of minus 38.
Yeah.
I haven't dared looked at it since then.
I have a feeling my grandchildren did not go to school today in Swan.
Everything's closed in Franklin County, I know, as far as schools.
Well, we lost one, I lost an over noon meeting because she lives in Montpelier and her daughters got sent home from school. I saw one of a school bus went by my house this morning, so I assumed the schools were open, but maybe they closed early. Okay, which is helpful to the parents that are working. Commissioner, welcome back. Oh, your background is what we need. Could you send us some of those sunflowers?
Working on it, Madam Chair, working on it.
Okay, this is helpful.
Power of positive imagery.
Senator Brock say at 11 o'clock at his house, it was minus 11 with a wind chill of minus 38.
That's
Just-
brutal.
It warmed right up. It's now minus 7 and wind chill is minus 20. Been
Well,
improvement.
Senator, you're a robust, hardy man, so I have confidence you'll get through it, but that is
It was only
indeed
minus 1
challenging.
when I came in this morning, so.
That's
But I
tough.
thought it was supposed to decrease all day. The chart I saw.
I'm afraid you're right, Madam Chair.
I'm going home and stay there. So we just thought,
Sorry.
we thought we would just get an update on the Universal Service Fund. I know E911 is being talked about. I know that's where we get the funding, and that used to be where we got the funding for broadband. Talk to us about what's happening and what you know about what's going on.
I sure will. Madam Chair, before I start, is it the case that the committee members have a printout of the slides I sent over or no?
It's on the website, so.
It's on the website. Very good.
Yeah.
So I will, I would prefer to simply talk to the committee instead of presenting the slides, but I'm
that's
glad to
fine.
do that. If you, okay, very good. Then maybe we'll do it that way. So the universe is universal service, which is the means by which we ensure that everybody in the state has access to voice service to talk and place emergency calls. Ensuring access is partly having the requisite equipment to do that. There are also two key components of that universality. One is the support that's provided so that folks can afford a telephone line, or two other kinds of lines as well that we won't get into right now. And the other is to make sure that they can access telephone service on an emergency basis, which is what E911 is about. And as you correctly recalled, E911 is a problem that we've been struggling with for many years now. And we complicated our lives a little bit in 2021, I think, when we also created a special carve out to fund the Vermont Community Broadband Board. So in a nutshell, for many, many years, Vermont was assessing a 2% charge on all retail voice telecommunications, whether those were made by a landline, a mobile phone, or voice over internet protocol service. In 2021, I believe, you added an increment of 0.4%, so you raised it to 2.4%. And the idea was to generate a specific amount of money to support the Vermont Community Broadband Board, their operations, as well as the function that you transferred to them from this fund, which was the program we called the Connectivity Initiative. And as you probably recall, the Connectivity Initiative is what Vermont was doing before we got all this federal funding. And we created the Vermont Community Broadband Board to do the massive amount, and I must say very successful work that they're doing to get every Vermonter last mile connected with fiber, et cetera. So the complication is this now. The fund has always been declining, or I shouldn't say always, but has been declining for many years now consecutively in terms of its revenue. But the E911 function remains absolutely essential for public safety, health and welfare, and the like. And you have a statute that sets out an order of priority in which the fund is to disperse those revenues that we receive every year from those retail sales of voice communications. And in that food chain, the E911 is at the bottom, though it has been receiving the lion's share of what's in the fund. So today, after 2021, the order of priority for disbursements is that carve out for the Vermont Community Broadband Fund, followed by administrative costs for the Vermont Universal Service administrator, then the telephone relay service that allows folks who are challenged in terms of hearing to be able to use telephony, then Lifeline program, which is the subsidy so that folks can afford to have basic telephone service, then E911, and then if anything is left, the dregs go into the connectivity fund, which has been transferred to the Vermont Community Broadband Board. The projections for this coming year are that $5,103,000 roughly will be generated in revenue. What I've noticed in the truing up between the projections and the audits of these of this fund is that the projection always is a little optimistic. The actual revenue has been coming in somewhere around the 4.9 million mark and the like, and it's a definite declining trend over many years. What is increasing, meanwhile, is the gap between what is available to fund E911 and what E911 needs by way of budget. And that's the issue that this committee and I have worked in various ways over the years to close. 2 years ago, a study was commissioned by the legislature asking the Secretary of Administration to come up with ideas about how we might address this thing permanently. That report was filed with the legislature in January of 2022. There was also a report that was filed by the Joint Fiscal Office. The date precisely escapes me, but there were two different recommendations in those respective reports about how you might handle this E911 funding problem and put it on permanent footing so that we can stop worrying about how we're going to pay for E911. The administration's recommendation was that this be general funded. They did flag a mechanism in their report that perhaps ought to be studied a little more, and that was to transition from assessing a fee on the retail voice communications to simply charging everybody with a line a flat fee. So it's a little like a demand charge for your electricity at home. The Joint Fiscal Office recommendation was broader. I think if memory serves, they were suggesting that you do a complete overhaul and have one telecommunications tax that would fund a variety of things. You may also recall that there was a study that was commissioned assigned to ACCD, which they in turn commissioned from Peter Blum, a former hearing officer over at the Public Utility Commission, who's now retired, very capable and very knowledgeable in the field. And the Blum, I think Bob Lauer worked with him on that as well. That report suggested a comprehensive look at a variety of issues in telecommunications and different approach to how you might solve this funding gap, and also swept into its scope the PEG, public educational governmental access television. So that is the state of affairs for this year. I would suggest that you speak with Barb Neal, the executive director of E911, to get the details on her budget requirements. But my understanding is that they're looking for a budget in the neighborhood of 4.5 million north or south. I apologize for not having the number off the top of my head. And my rough math of the USF fund is that there will be, once again, a shortfall. Last year, the quick and dirty solution was to, I think, appropriate $1 million from general fund to E911 to simply resolve their funding gap that had been aggravated by postponing certain IT measures and like that they were supposed to do. And so here we are again, and you're facing the same problem. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, probably can't kick that can down the road anymore. And we were also, when we were looking at, this is where we were, getting our connectivity money. This is where we were just finding a few $1,000s here and there to subsidize broadband companies to expand service up where there were fewer than 10 people a mile. And so we were looking for a way to fund broadband in a perhaps larger scale and to keep everybody else solvent. And we've got a lot of federal money. So we're gonna make, it looks like, some really big inroads. At least get enough of the broadband up and running so they can go to the bond market.
Oh, it's exciting what they're doing over at the
Yeah.
VCBB, really. And I just want to flag for you that there is all this federal money. I'm sure Director Hallquist will second this when I say it's not yet enough, but I think we have moved folks in a direction where they can raise money in due course, as you just pointed out. But what's important, I think, to remember is that that increment of money that was set aside from the Universal Service Fund to fund the VCBB operations, I do believe that needs to be protected. It's $1 million, give or take.
Yeah,
And that's what they're using to pay for their staff and the like. The federal dollars, I am not expert on all the programs, but I have noticed that the federal bucks are really restrictive when it comes to funding admin costs and the like. So I think it would be well advised for Vermont to continue to carve out that increment for the VCBB, but it does beg the question of what are we going to do about E911? And the administration's position has been that it really ought to be funded out of general fund because it's just such a basic, societal service. And if you did that, that would leave, funds left over in the USF fund to pay for telephone relay service, lifeline program, and then another pet interest of mine personally, which is also addressing the inadequacy of cell service in the state. So the connectivity initiative, in a sense, has been overcome when it comes to broadband because of all the federal money, but we're not doing anything for cell service. And my suggestion would be that we start trying to do a little bit in that direction too. So do for cell service what we were trying to do for broadband before all the federal funding came.
okay. And the proposal also was to move E911 to public safety.
Yes.
Do I remember that correctly?
Administratively, that's where we left off. And
Right
to
now
be
getting
clear,
tied up with dispatch.
that I would have Commissioner Morrison in to talk about. As you know, there's been a changing of the guard over there, and I've kind of lost track of where they are on suggesting reforms there.
I
So,
am not touching dispatch with a 10-foot pole.
well, I thought I'd try.
Senator Brock has a question.
That's the point with, the group of us who got together
Yes,
across the hall with JCOM. And Ruth Hardy has agreed to take the ball on the dispatch, and that's now being dealt with in GovOps.
right.
And I think the E911 and perhaps the whole ball of wax about funding, at least as a starting discussion before it comes here, that's a great place to have it.
I think that's probably where it's going to be. They're all emergency dispatch. It's how you do it. We're coming into a new world. I remember when Vermonters would not give you their address. They did not want the government knowing where they live. And I'm pretty sure that's why the E911 board, or just 911, is a separate, not part of the police or anything else. Because something that's been there, it was not easy. And we still don't have the reverse calling, I don't think. The schools we must have some of it now. But I was on Cape Cod and there was a tropical storm coming, and I'm saying, I wonder how I'm going to know if we have to evacuate, or if the inlet at the bottom of the street floods. That's when I can't get out. And the police chief called everybody, robocall, and said, this is what's going on, we'll notify you. And it was very reassuring to know that there was some communications that was going to tell me when I needed to evacuate, which we never did. But we talked about that years ago, and it again was controversial. That was prison escapes. How do you tell the folks around, probably when we were opening Newport, that somebody's escaped and you should lock your doors? So Senator Chittenden.
So I heard you say one thing that I'm just trying to reconcile, is that I think you said the governor's position, or you conveyed that he has thought that it should come from the general fund to support E911 because it's such a fundamental service. I definitely agree it's a fundamental service. I support rational assessment, and in my mind, it seems very rational to argue that cell phone service should be directly funding E911. I have two daughters, teen daughters, and I got them phones sooner than I would have expected because I want them to have a device that they can call 911 and that I can call them at any time. So it seems like this is the rational place for at least a bulk of funding. I'm glad that GovOps is doing it, but I'd be really curious to know how our Universal Service Fund compares to other states, because I do see a reason to have it fund E911 and continue to fund it, and may possibly even more so.
Well, Senator Chittenden, you are joining a long story debate, and there are many, many people who would agree with exactly what you just said. This issue that we're confronting here in Vermont is not unique to Vermont. It's playing out in just about every state in the nation. And there are some states who have chosen to stick with the kind of model that we have, others who have chosen to transition to the fixed fee proposal that I was talking about a moment ago. The jury's still out on whether that's working or not, but California and Nebraska are among the states that are trying that. And others are taking yet different approaches. So I think you'll find many people who would agree with you that it makes sense to do, in theory, what we've been doing. And then there's the reality that what we've been doing is not keeping up with what we need the fund to be doing. So then the one answer is we'll simply raise the charge. And that is certainly a tool in the toolbox, but I do have to be clear that I'm not advocating for that. The administration would not support that. In terms of the comprehensive work that's being done at GovOps, I couldn't agree more. It's a good opportunity to be looking at emergency communications very differently from how they've been looked at so far. They are bound up very much with what Senator Cummings was just describing. The needs that we might have for E911 increasingly are driven by weather that people don't expect. And so to be thinking about how that infrastructure works together with other things we do, like Vermont Emergency Management, I think is a very good idea. In other words, streamline the way you do it before you argue about how to pay for it, figure out how to pay afterwards.
Because the concerns we were getting last year before, were a day like this, a tree, well, we had a tree come down over here and hit a transformer, and the lines are down. And I can't reach 911, and during a power outage, I can't reach 911 because my home phone has a battery in it and it's wireless, and they don't tell us to replace the batteries. But when 911 went up, I don't think people it was new and it was wonderful, but I think people understood this was Vermont and sometimes the power goes out, and didn't expect that they would have that access 24/7. And so that's a new, we're talking about redundancy. So, but that gets expensive. You've got to run something other than another power line. And so there's definitely more being expected from the system. The funding system is definitely not keeping pace. I mean, it was nowhere near what we needed for broadband. It was pretty pathetic what we were able to do, given what we've done. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it is tied up with this, with emergency service dispatch, which it really is. But it gets, everybody wants it, but it's who pays for it and how. And I'm afraid that will all come here eventually. They may reach a conclusion, but we're going to have to look at it and agree that that's a good proposal they've come up with. So, okay.
So it's kind of the thing, you want to just send everybody out to the hall to work out a solution among themselves and then come back with the answer for us.
That's what I like. But we do have one member of the public. Has very strong opinions. Okay, anything else we should know?
Not on the topic not on USF per se, but you did ask me in the request for testimony to speak to innovations and workforce issues. And I'm thinking we probably don't have that time today because there's just a
Only
little bit of
about
time left.
5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so the bad news is that my best knowledge probably isn't going to be fresh because I go to a conference next week where I likely will be hearing about innovations. So I don't have a lot to say on that
We will let
topic.
you off the hook today.
Fair enough, but I would recommend that you consider having in several of the utilities now have chief innovation officers and the like. And so if you have the time, you might find it interesting to visit with them to get their take on what the technological advances are. On the workforce thing, when she's got nothing better to do, I would highly recommend that you have Director Hallquist in because she's been struggling, I should really say, in addition to struggling, also achieving a lot of progress in this area in trying to grow the workforce that does the broadband expansion. And she's been drawing on her utility executive experience as well to put together what really looks like cutting edge work in this area.
I think
So-
she touched on it when they were in here, but no depth. So maybe, Jill, we
Yeah.
could at least Green Mountain Power and what?
Velco, I would highly recommend Velco as
Betsy,
well,
the Vermont Power Supply.
or Carrick Johnson from Velco to come in and talk about
Okay,
either
or
workforce or innovations.
All right.
The thing about workforce is that this has been an issue it's been a train wreck coming toward everybody in the nation for well over a decade and a half, 2 decades, the graying of the workforce, no question. The utilities here, I regularly ask them about that, and they do succession planning. They do reach out to recruit utility workers. But what I hear back regularly is that the coming generation is very much computer focused and
You don't
less
want to
being
climb a pole today?
not on Christmas Eve in an ice storm. But I don't want to slander the younger generation because there are folks out there I run into all the time, young folks doing this work who just have an admirable sense of duty. And I particularly have in mind the folks who responded at Christmas Eve. I mean, they're not in the military and they were out there doing things that soldiers would do. So
yeah.
it's just a demographic struggle that's really coming to a head now, along with the great resignation that we've been living through. So again, might be useful to talk to Christine Hallquist about how she's been getting out ahead of the problem in the broadband context and whether there are lessons to be drawn from that that could apply more broadly to the electric utilities.
Okay, good suggestion. We'll get that on. I've got 3 bills on my board right now, and we're gonna have them all dispensed with in about 48 hours. So we've got some time, and which is a luxury.
Well, you know you're going to pay for that in April.
Oh, I know. No, yeah, March. But this gives us some time to do some of that background we don't frequently get the time to do because just the time constraints on Senate committees. Thank you. That is helpful.
My pleasure.
Can you send that picture so we can hang it up your back?
I can do that for you.
It looks so warm and sunny behind you.
I can do that. Meanwhile, everybody, please stay safe and warm this weekend.
We're gonna try. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm
Bye-bye.
gonna get him out of here for the car's freezing. Okay, I have got 5 minutes. I would like a vote on the confirmation of Kevin Gaffney to be the Commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation. If someone would make that motion. Senator Gray has moved. We don't need a second in committee. Discussion. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So now we can just do this. All those in favor say aye of confirming the appointment of Kevin Gaffney to be the Commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation for the term from and including July 5th, 2022, and including February 28th, 2023, and until a successor is appointed. So this is only through the end of this month.
Is there another appointment?
Yeah, I don't know if these are annual, why, he filled out the term of Mike Pichek, I guess. So this is another one where either this year or the first thing next year, we'll get another reappointment. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. That carries 601. I will report that. And I just need a few of a sticky note and I'll take, this is the formal thing, right? Yes, so I will take that up whenever we get a break, probably the end of the day for sure. Department of Financial Regulation. Okay. Sarah McDonald, I know you've got sticky notes. I see it. Here. I don't have one. That works. There's nothing to sign. No. Okay. All right, so that's done, and we are 1 minute early for Abby Sherman. Is she?
She's in the waiting room.
She is in the waiting room. Okay, let's bring Abby in.
Every day, it's always.
This room looks so different.
You got a Jaguar.
On the screen?
Yeah,
Yeah, the colors.
it looks like appropriations.
Yeah.
The door is in the wrong place. Okay. There's Abby. Hello.
Hi, I wasn't sure.
Okay, I don't like your backdrop as well as Commissioner Tierney. She had sunflowers and solar panels.
Well, I could put palm trees. I would prefer that.
That's probably it. Okay, that reminds us of why we're trying to get out of here before everybody's car has to be jump started. Just thought, we've got several new members on the committee. You're not new, but we've been remote and really haven't done a lot of work with BEPC in the last year or so. So I thought just give you a chance. I know we're going to have you back in because there's some concerns about the REMI model and some recent events, but just tell us what you are, what you do, and we're ready to go.
Okay,
Floor is yours.
so Abby Sherman, Executive Director for the Vermont Economic Progress Council. I kind of had the understanding that most committee members already had some understanding of the VEGI and TIF programs as far as how they work. So I was prepared to kind of go through the annual report data and give sort of an
That's
update
fine.
about what we've been doing.
My new members are saying yes, so that.
Okay. Let me just, I'm going to share my screen of the presentation that I think the committee already has. Can you all see that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. So the Vermont Economic Progress Council works with two programs, as you know, the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive Program and the Tax Increment Financing Program. And I thought I would start off with VEGI. I have to move a few things on my screen here though. Okay. This is just a quick overview chart of where the incentive comes from. As part of the application review for the veggie program, a complex cost benefit model is run, and it looks at the revenues that the company's growth would bring to the state, which is this green section here, less the cost to the state of that growth. And the incentive comes from the new revenue, the net new revenue to the state. So this comes from this yellow piece here. Most of the incentive dollars are derived from jobs created, and there is less emphasis on capital investment, which is something we hope to address this year. There's a lot of data in these slides, which I apologize for. But that's pretty much what the annual reports are. It's a lot of data. So we release the Veggie annual report on September 1st every year. And from that report, from 2007 to 2021, there were 115 applications that had received final approval. And they were authorized a total of 85.8 million in maximum incentives. And so that is as if every new employee that they identified that they would hire, every new job was created on January 1st. So their actual incentives are adjusted downward from that based on when they actually hire their employees. Incentives are only awarded if performance targets are met. So in that same time period from 2007 to 2021, 64 applications received an incentive payment, paying out a total of 33.8 million in incentives for the creation of 8,812 jobs, a total of 514 million in new qualifying payroll, and 1 billion in capital investments. So I just kind of wanted to point out that difference between the incentives authorized and the amounts actually paid in the same time period. The next slide. So just a highlight of just for the 2020 claims, that is the most recent actual data that we have. There's pretty much a 2-year lag from the time that the calendar year ends. Applicants have until April 30th of the following year to file their claim, and then it takes tax over a year to review all of the claims and issue payments. Once that process is completed, then we have all of the data that we need to report the actual events to the legislature in the September 1st report. So for 2020, there were 394 new qualifying jobs that were created with 25.59 million in new qualifying payroll, which is an average wage of 64,957, and 32.9 million in new capital investments. For applicants that met or maintained their performance targets, they were paid 2.5 million in incentives, whereas 3.78 million was originally projected to be paid to them. So again, that difference in what was authorized and what was actually paid. Every report has some success stories, and I know a few of you have already seen this in Senate Economic Development. But the first is CAD, which was a company that expanded their operations from California, taking up shop in a vacant building in East Randolph. Another applicant that has been very successful is Beta. They were able to expand their South Burlington location with the use of Veggie, and they continue to grow there. They were also approved for a second Veggie Award in 2022 for a building that has been underutilized in St. Albans town. So a little bit more information on the 2022 Veggie applications specifically. VEPC approved 4 final applications. We received 5 in total, but Simon Pierce subsequently canceled their application. Total maximum incentives authorized was 5.4 million, with a net revenue benefit to the state after incentives are paid of 1.18 million. There were 2 applicants that were authorized to receive the green Veggie enhancement for jobs in the environmental technology sector, and 1 applicant received an enhancement for being located in an economically disadvantaged labor market area, which is an area that has either higher unemployment or lower wages than the state average. For projected activity from 2007 to 2026, and this is very preliminary, it includes the 2022 applications, but we don't have the 2021 claims data in there yet. So if there were some businesses that were reported since terminated since the last report, that is not reflected here. But for all active applications from 2007 to 2026, we're expecting that there would be 3,117 new qualifying employees, 179.85 million in new qualifying payroll for an average wage of over 57,000 and 440.5 million in new capital investments. Obviously, we've had a lot more capital investments than that number, but as far as qualifying jobs and qualifying employees, I did notice when I was entering in the data that this estimate has actually dropped from the year before, and that would be because of applications that had canceled since the time of the annual report. That is it on the veggie program. I don't know if I want to, if I should pause there, if there are any questions.
Committee, any questions? Okay, Senator
I hope I didn't miss this, and I apologize if I did. I just want to better understand with capital investments, can that include housing creation? Because I think, in the overlap between economic development and finance, some of the concerns raised about continuing the program in its current form have to do with attracting new people here where there's just simply nowhere to live. So when I see capital investments, I just want to know if that can include housing.
It doesn't. It's capital investments in the business. So it's purchasing land, it's developing that land for the business operation. However, that is a question, where are you going to find these people and where are they going to live? That is a question. Those are questions that the council repeatedly asks businesses when they come in. And businesses are getting creative. There have been a few who said, we develop housing for them. But this program doesn't specifically support housing.
Mm-hmm.
But could it? Because I have to say, recently I was talking to somebody, and maybe I shouldn't mention a company name, but in a rural area that really wants to hire people, but there's no place for them to live. And that company is thinking about building single occupancy places for them to live. So do you know of any other states that do allow for housing to be in veggie applications?
I'm not aware, but it's certainly something, the legislature could add that as an allowable capital investment. I will say though that under the current program, the capital investments do not weigh very heavily in the calculation of the incentive, which is another area that we would like to change how that incentive is calculated, which would give more weight to capital investments.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can I ask a logistical question of the chair?
Yeah.
We have had a similar presentation in economic development, and I didn't know traditionally veggie lives in here or is shared.
Veggie lives in here because it impacts taxes.
Right.
Revenues. It's one of those foregone taxes. We're actually, originally we returned their taxes or forgave them, and that got confusing. So now you only get the money when you can demonstrate that you created the jobs or did the capital investment.
Right.
And then part of the taxes you've paid in are returned to you.
Right.
I think this was Hinda Miller's brainchild. But that's where we are. The definition of capital investments could change. or expand.
And the weight that it gets at the same time.
And we can look at all of that. I think, the needs now are probably, we did this when we needed jobs. Well, right now we need people to fill jobs. So this would be something we could look at along with workforce training. And or a bonus if you move someone in from out of state.
And how's that?
How
I just really need people
Yeah,
to-
so, okay, I mean, this is what it's been doing. I'm not gonna say this hasn't been a controversial program. Giving money to private business has always been controversial. I don't know of a state that doesn't do it. It is part of competition to get good jobs.
I know you have more slides, but I'm curious, is there any comparison to other states on a per capita basis, how much Vermont spends on veggie versus our corollaries?
I don't know, Abby, do you have any comparison with other states?
I don't in my slides. I know that the agency has been working with Guidehouse, who has been helping us with all of the Treasury guidance, to look at our incentive programs and, economic development programs. And I know that veggie was one area that they did look at. So I just would have to find that data, pull that data.
All right, so we probably need to talk to housing and community development and take a look even at a broader spectrum as to what we do. Okay,
To your last comment, Chair, I was just connected to yesterday's presentation about growing that denominator. I see veggie as growing the average pay rate as well as the overall wage base so that we can draw from to pay for other initiatives. So
that's the idea. I mean, the idea is, and they have other charts I've seen before that for the dollars that you pay out, every one of those new jobs is paying in income, property, sales tax, and that's net gain to the state. That's part of what is due there. Okay, I've got Senator Bray and then Senator Robbins.
I want to just check in, having served on the council, we went through the analyses each time and there was always the but-for test. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that because there's always some controversy around that test. It's a little difficult to prove a negative, like this would not have happened but for the investment. Do you have any comments on that? Has that test been improved, revised? It's been.
So I have been with BEPC. I've been with BEPC for I think 5 years now. Maybe it's 6. I lost count. And just over a year as the executive director. In that time, I haven't seen a change to the test for the but-for. I can provide more details on what we actually ask for in the application, but in general, we ask, are you advertising for jobs? Have you signed a purchase and sale agreement? Have you signed a lease? Have you made any advances that might indicate this is going to happen anyways? And then to the best of our ability, we check those statements. We search the internet, we check our jobs being advertised, and if they are they here in Vermont? Are they elsewhere? There are questions that are asked during the council meeting regarding their but-for statements. So I can provide the committee with more details on what is actually in the application, what we asked for on that, if you'd like.
There was one incident where there was some disagreement about what for this past year, and I think we will definitely have a session where we will look at that. Because I think we all want this to work and we want to make sure that the system is as accurate as you can make it. You are always at some point, depending on human veracity and whether or not they're tell you the truth. And again, it is, some people believe that these things would happen anyway, and other people believe, no, they wouldn't. And in my experience, no matter how much information you put out there, those are pretty tightly held beliefs.
If I may, there would always be the applicants would come in, there'd be a formal discussion about the application, the project, the jobs. And not infrequently, we would hear about, well, we're also getting an offer from another location. And so it felt like we were between a rock and a hard place. If you said no, could be foregoing the opportunity to bring that business. The other problem was, I think, the 49 other states always had much bigger checkbooks than Vermont. So we weren't able to make the most lucrative offer. But it wasn't a great situation to be in. And I don't know honestly how we could improve on it. But I feel like it's something we're almost forced to do in order to not be an outlier and not offer anything. I'm also not sure that it always delivers the return that we actually think we're getting.
So I think this has been controversial. I was at, I think it was an NCSL meeting, and it was states. Everybody there felt the same way. If I don't do it, we've got states around us that got better tax situations and states with more money. And so I'm doing the little I can to prove that I really do want you. And by the way, we have clean air and mountains and life is good here. But we don't have as much money as Texas. And every one of them hated it, but unless we can, as a group of states, say, we aren't doing this anymore. Companies used to train their own workforce. We're training workforce now. Times have changed, but this is the world that we live in, and it is what it is. And I think this is the best system we've come up with.
They had a touch of the mutual assured destruction about it.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, you had to get everyone to step down or everyone was paying.
Yeah.
Well, so before I ask my question, I just want to say, I'm sure Abby thinks about that all the time, because you look at a company like Beta, they both grew up here on Logic, the wife grew up here. They're not trying to leave. They're not ever threatening to leave the state. And if we don't also give resources to those folks, then we're only giving them to the hostage takers, so we want to be fair too, that they're not all just saying like, I'm gonna leave, but at some point it would be heartbreaking for them, but they might not get what they need here to support workforce.
We need to make sure that the capital is there. And I have one local business who was being regularly courted by China.
Right, yeah.
And they offered him a really good deal to move his business. He wouldn't have to go, but his business, they were making some kind of electrical components and, just move it to China. And that, we are in a worldwide competition now. And I think especially when we grow our own, we have a history of growing businesses, some big, and they reach a point where they get bought out by big corporations. And that seems to be the life cycle, and I'm not sure we can stop that. A lot of the reason is we are in a transportation cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to get your product out to a national market. There are folks in Essex Junction, they've been trying to do the bypass, for 50 years, over 20.
Even fulfillment is hard here.
Yes, because you can't get out to the interstate, and then you've got to take our interstate down to one of the north, south, east, west routes.
Right.
And the same with rails. I mean, you have to go down to Boston and then south to go to California.
Right.
Wow.
I did still have a question.
Okay, you get your question.
So, I mean, given, and talk about China, I mean, China and India, their workforce is there. I mean, that's what we're competing with too. We're competing with the rest of the country and we're not doing very well on workforce. Do we get any information on, does this incentive help them bump the pay a little bit so that they actually fill the job? Are we seeing a better rate of, connecting to someone who takes the job through this program? Or when you say qualifying employees and payroll, could those be sitting open as job listings the same way that it's happening in the rest of the economy? Like, do you have any better success than the rest of Vermont right now at filling jobs?
So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that because that deals more with the actual data. And we just with VEPSI, we deal with, what their projected activity will be, and then tax receives the actual data. But the point of the program is to increase wages in Vermont, which is why we have that qualifying wage. And I have heard from some companies that, well, if you want us to grow here, part of their but-for is if you want us to grow here and pay that, we have to have the veggie wage, or we can go to another country, another state, and pay less. So I don't know if that.
No, that helps. It would be nice if someone had the data. That would be nice.
ACCD might.
Okay.
Yeah, or labor might have it. Tax might have some of that data.
Okay, question?
Yeah, just a quick expansion on the comment that we're a cul-de-sac. We're not supposed to be. Going back to the 1840s, the railroad through Vermont was always conceived as Montreal to New York and Boston.
Right.
And the world via that way. And the idea that we're not getting into Montreal is just,
That's a comment on that. So it's really exciting how the interstate is going to be connected straight up to Montreal very soon. If you haven't been up there recently, they're just doing one last
They've
bridge.
done one.
Yeah, and
It's much easier not to do those little towns.
they are putting $1.5 billion into their port. So there's going to be within 100 miles, better access to the international markets for all of Vermont. So I'm really excited about that Montreal connection in the decade to come.
yeah.
But we've got to really work on that because I went to grad school with the economic development director for upstate New York, 45 minutes from downtown Montreal. And he spent half his life and had brought several Montreal businesses to upstate New York, and we were in China.
So bring them down here, wine and dine.
Yeah,
Go back
we
down here.
need that, that is something. But that's not Bepsi's job. They don't wine and dine anybody. They're there when they come to them. And our personal taxes would be good. Our corporate taxes, I'm told that Canada has a very low corporate tax. But we can look into that.
Bringing businesses down, the problem is who's gonna work in it.
That's,
Yeah,
well, that's the
whole
issue,
demographic
yeah.
issue that we're dealing with. It's the same issue. Pepsi was there to attract businesses to Vermont.
Right.
And we're not in a position of attracting a lot of businesses to Vermont because we don't have anybody to work in it.
Yep.
Heaven forbid, if we got a huge industry that wanted to come here, what we would do.
In Canada, it was on the news, 2 weeks ago, they are actively out looking for immigration.
Yeah.
They've always had more restrictive is qualified, not anybody can come to Canada. But they're out, anybody with the skills they need, they are out.
Those that don't fit that profile, they set the high gate.
If you can make it, you get prime, you go to the front of the line in Quebec because you speak French as your native language.
Haitian.
Haitian. Yeah.
I
Okay,
want to speak native French.
well,
I was
no,
learning something new.
they are very definitely their own province. Okay, any more questions for Abby? So Abby, I know you have usually reports that show who got, grants from you, what county they're in. And I assume sometime that will be out and we can look at it. And then-
Yes, I did provide that to the committee as well. I provided both the
Okay.
veggie report and the TIF
Well,
report.
For some reason, I am not getting.
Okay, I can email
It
those.
says the server is not up on my computer last time I tried to get in here.
Okay, I can email those directly to the committee.
Well, if you do, yeah, just send them to Jill. I eventually, whatever's going on with the computers.
They're on the committee page.
Okay, I can't get the committee page. And I don't know if it's, but my iPad has issues. It won't do Zoom either. And they have told me they will replace it. I just haven't gotten time to do that. And it may just be my computer's having a hiccup. Okay, so.
I do have a section on TIF as well, but I know we're almost at time, so.
Yeah, we are. And we are actually getting a discussion on the auditor and the Burlington TIF, but Burlington, Milton, and Winooski were TIFs unto themselves. They came in before we did any state TIF law. So do you still oversee them?
VEPSI began oversight of those districts. I want to say it was really implemented in 2015 when the TIF rule was adopted. I think it actually started a little bit earlier than that, but it was with TIF rule that provided more specifics on how VEPSI would oversee those districts. So the audit covered a period prior to 2015. I think it started in 2010. And then even once we did have the authority to provide oversight of the waterfront district, it took a little while to get everything in place. But I think improvements are being made. And it should be, should be good going from here.
You're welcome to sit in and listen. There is a bill coming out that may see us going more to project-based TIFs. And that discussion's going to happen. Any new TIFs in the works?
I think everyone is aware of this, but we did approve the Killington TIF district over the summer. And VEPSI just approved Killington's first phase filing in December.
Yeah.
So we should be, something should be happening there probably this summer. They may break ground on their first projects there. Montpelier dissolved, which I think you all know that as well, which reopens that slot from the 6 new districts that VEPSI could approve. Rutland, I know, is looking at a TIF district. They've been working on it for at least a year, maybe 2 years, maybe longer. I know there have been some other towns that have been interested in a TIF district, but nothing has really materialized yet.
I think we're trying to figure out is if we went to a project-based TIF instead of the whole TIF district, basically most of you downtown, if that would work better for the bulk of Vermont towns and might have less impact, hopefully, on the end fund, which is the offset for this.
I think that, I do believe it would work better, project-based TIF for smaller towns, but I still think there's a place for TIF districts for the larger towns, such as Rutland City, maybe Brattleboro. I don't know if they've ever considered one, maybe St. Johnsbury.
we will hear from everyone, but think about that. I don't think I could support doing both just because of the impact on the ed fund, which I'm not sure any of us want to hear what the tax rates are gonna look like this year, so. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, we do have the larger community saying project-based TIFs would also work for them. It would just be specific to a project instead of.
I know Montpelier is
Region,
thinking of
yeah.
going to a smaller base. So we'll have that discussion with everybody involved. Okay, you're welcome to stay on. I think, have we got our next witnesses are in. We're looking at the auditor's report on the Burlington TIF. And what is going on?
No, they didn't submit anything for this one.
This says that the server has stopped responding to Safari.
Is that a cold weather thing?
I don't know.
No, computers don't like cold weather.
Problem earlier today, didn't it?
It could be my computer just, no one knows why it won't take a Zoom call either. I get the same kind of message, so maybe Monday I will have a discussion with Shadi. Okay. So we are here. There's the auditor. Auditor, you must be cold sitting out there in front of the State House.
Yeah.
I know last time you were here, we were trying to get a schedule for the Burlington audits, and was not one of our greater successes. So apparently whatever happened, happened, and just wanted to have you come in, talk to us a little bit about what you found and, you know, any questions we should be looking at or changes to the present law. So,
Sure, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, this was a complicated job, took a very long time. I'm glad it's behind us. As for how to imagine or visualize it, do you remember back in 2014 or 15 when Governor Shumlin and the Commissioner of DFR and Bill Sorrell all presented their original findings about EB5 and you had the spaghetti map?
mhm.
Remember that? Okay, keep that image.
It's not like the disturb.
This was a real challenge. And I remember Mr. Hessler was in back in the day and said, oh my, we're not ready to do this because the records are everywhere. We have to find them. And that was certainly the case. They worked hard. It took longer than it should have, but that's what happens when records aren't kept adequately.
And this
time
was
passes.
before COVID that we were talking about this audit, I believe.
It was in the fall of 21.
Yeah,
Actually, spring of 21. Yeah.
yeah, it's been a while. Okay.
So I think it's fair to say, and the city would acknowledge that, over time, there were a couple of key problems. One, they didn't at the outset of this term, I should say, 2011 through 21, have the necessary systems in place to ensure good record keeping and easy access to information. And that went on for a while, and that was compounded, I think, by turnover of key people, so that when new folks came in, they didn't have the framework that you would hope, and you could pass along, an easy to understand framework. That wasn't available. And a number of other issues. So in the end, the city provided just about everything we needed. They found information they hadn't known. They found information they questioned, we questioned, we all, I think Catherine would agree that we ended up on the same page for the most part. There were some problems, too much paid to one party, not enough paid to another party, back and forth. And there were a number of those issues. It's not an easy thing to explain, but in the end, the net is not as bad as it might have been, or we might have thought going in. Sometimes they paid more than they should have. Sometimes they paid less. And the dollar amounts are not insignificant, but not as bad as they might have been if there wasn't, countervailing pieces to the puzzle. So it's not terrible. It could be worse. I think the city's in a position and has agreed to make almost everything right. We still disagree about a couple of things that they may come to you with. And a couple of them actually, I'd like to mention to you because they reflect, I think, a continuing problem with the whole program. And that is the city disagrees with some opinions from the Attorney General's office. And as you remember, Madam Chair, we first addressed this question of VEPC having a different view than the Attorney General back at the St. Albans audit. And they made a decision that pretty much ignored and blew off an opinion from the Attorney General, which I struggle with to this day. And the city of Burlington is suggesting that our understanding of the AG opinions, one regarding the tax of the boathouse, another is another property that we said should have been included in the OTB when it was adjusted. And they have every right to challenge anything and everything that relates to this project and anything else. But when you have an opinion from the Attorney General, I'm not sure what's the point of fighting it. If you want to go to the legislature, you can, but that raises a related issue, and that is, at what point is this program done? Can we have consistent and predictable rules or not? And it seems to bounce around based on the perceived needs of an individual town or city. Not all the time, but enough to make you wonder, when will this ever be done? And I struggle with the idea that it's okay to say no to an opinion of the Attorney General. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to acknowledge that that's the party that gets to decide. If you want to change the statute, fine, but why? Why should the parties keep coming back to you guys for a program that's now 20 years old for changes? So I wonder about that. Now, having said that, it's always appropriate to reconsider a major program. If enough time has passed and you have enough questions floating around that you want to resolve, maybe they're granular, maybe they're not. But these seem to be part of an effort to make use of what can be perceived as, I think, not always, but in some instances, VEPC's view of its role as a partner as opposed to an independent arm's length entity that oversees this completely independently. And they have an attorney that they rely on, who is an attorney for the Agency of Commerce, who does not work for the Attorney General. And that to me is an issue that should be addressed. It's not just about ACCD. I think there are a couple of other free range attorneys, for lack of a better word, that are out there in state government. It's not common anymore, but there's still a few. So I don't know what else to say at this point, except we all, I think Catherine, and I don't see if Richard's here. Yeah, I guess he is. We had an exit meeting where it wasn't a kumbaya moment, but everybody appreciated the hard work of the other side. We got to the end of it. For the most part, there's understanding and agreement about where we are. So I don't know what else to tell you at the moment, but I'm happy to take questions.
Okay. Can you tell us, what were the findings? What should we be, what did everybody disagree with the Attorney General for?
Well, those are two comparatively minor issues. The other stuff where there was agreement, for example, there's $1 million thereabouts that the city has to now, pay the TIF fund from its general fund or some other non-TIF source. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The city agreed, and I think to their advantage, they found some money that wasn't expected, so the hit's not going to be too bad on the city. That matters to me because I live here. But the two issues remaining, or two of the three, there's a third. One of them is regards to the boathouse. I'm sure you all know we have a boathouse, beautiful boathouse. Actually, the ribbon cutting occurred the first week I came to work for the city of Burlington in 1988. And the city questioned whether it was subject to the property tax. And we went to the Attorney General, and the answer was yes, it is, for reasons having to do with the test from the Supreme Court in years past. And it all seemed pretty straightforward. But the city has another theory now that they would like to test, and I'm not quite sure if it'll hold water, but they can try. I have communicated with the Attorney General and asked her and the staffer who helped prepare the other memo to take a look at it. I don't think they feel it's urgent because there's nothing before them. The city hasn't gone to them. You guys haven't asked for it, but I was just curious and hoped we could get it before the report was done, but we did not. The other relates to downtown tax. The city, like many other towns and cities in Vermont, has more than one tax. We have streets and parks and so forth. And this one was for downtown, and the city claimed that it was not covered by the TIF statute, which says, all taxes have to be considered for increment in the TIF district. And they said, not this tax. And we also took that to the Attorney General. It was an interesting question. And the Attorney General said, yes, it should be covered. It should be part of the TIF increment. So they're not satisfied with that. And I think may make some effort to question that. I'm not quite sure what venue, but you may see it come to you at some point. So we'll see.
So it's the tax status of the boathouse, which.
Yeah. Yeah, the boathouse itself is taxable because it isn't owned. I mean, the city owns it, but ownership is not the key, it's use.
Okay,
And the city leases most of the boathouse to an entity that provides food and beverage. So that's pretty much covered. I think their outstanding question is, wait, the boathouse is not on land. Is it subject to the property tax? It's kind of an interesting question, but kind of wait and see.
one local landlord says he owns the rights over the Winooski River when we were talking about putting a walk out there. So yeah, but all right, yeah, because when the state leases property in Montpelier on a lease purchase, it pays taxes until the state actually purchases it.
Right.
All right, even though they're using it. This is kind of the reverse. Senator Chittenden and then Senator Brock.
I want to confirm that with the news reports I've read about this and your recent interview on Newstalk WVMT, you didn't see any intention. There wasn't any intentional fraud by any part. If anything, these were just complex, and TIFs are complex. I'd love to validate that is in fact true. And then my second part to that is really if Burlington, the largest city in the great state of Vermont, had these complexities, and I know you're going to be auditing others, including South Burlington, I'm worried that you're going to see even more of this, and I'm wondering what your going forward strategy is for all of our TIF truing up.
Well, good questions both. Thank you. No, first of all, audits don't measure intent. And if I believe there is bad intent, then I refer it to the state police or some other authorities. And I certainly didn't see that here and have never suggested that, to be clear. So no, that's not an issue and never was. The problem, as I mentioned before, is a matter of inadequate record keeping and so forth, having nothing to do with intent. And I can say, as I think I alluded to before, that Catherine, Richard, and others who are not here today worked very hard to help us get through this. I don't think we started out on great footing, but the teams, I think in the end, came to respect each other, which is what you hope for. As for the bigger picture, we've had found some issues or encountered some problems in other towns. Nothing like Burlington for the obvious reasons. I think Burlington is the biggest city in the state. This is by far, or actually one of the biggest TIF projects. South Burlington started out to be almost equal magnitude, if not more, but has come back down a little bit. I don't think we'll ever see another TIF town have this magnitude or breadth of problems. Burlington had a lot of projects. It was a big, complex district. And of course, there was another one, is the whole downtown district, which we'll get to in a couple of years. So for the reasons that are self-evident, it is a complex undertaking. And if you're not ready at the outset with systems in place to manage it, you've got a problem. And in the case of Burlington, their own auditors, their regular financial statement auditors, warned them or notified them on 3 or 4 occasions in years past that they had some problems with their capital project bookkeeping. And they knew that. And I think partway through that period, probably close to when we started, they have taken steps to get some help. So I'm sure that I expect it'll be fine going forward. But as for other cities and towns, I'd be surprised if we see anything quite like this. I hope not.
Okay. Senator Brock, did you have a question?
Just a couple of questions. One, you had mentioned the magnitude of the amount on the debit side, the amount on the credit side that more or less equaled each other out and minimized the amount of the final result. How big was the magnitude in either direction? Unfortunately, I've just got the report today, so I've read the executive summary, but I've gone into the detail yet.
Yeah, it was not insubstantial. You're up to seven figures, more or less on both sides. Low, very low seven figures. But, in addition to all the things I've mentioned, the city also had a number of other funding streams, which is not uncommon in TIF towns. They're looking to get some federal money if they can, and state money and so forth, different programs. So that makes the bookkeeping and accounting a little more complicated still, and requires more focus on the front end to make sure that you're tracking which funds go where. In fact, we found at some point, there may have been double billing for something. And I have no reason to believe that was intentional. Some of it was to the bond bank, handling the municipal bonds, and some was regarding the feds. When you find that stuff and people go, oh my goodness, we didn't know, or there was a misunderstanding, or we weren't as clear with one party as we should have been, and so forth. So it's complicated. It's a lot of money. And South Burlington is in a similar position for different reasons. The dollar amounts aren't quite that high, but low seven figures, to answer your question. But luckily, the amount owed to the Ed Fund, which the city is disputing, is under $200,000, which is good. Sorry.
Now, a lot of this is I think the root cause you mentioned was complexity. What about competency? Was there a competency issue?
I have no reason to believe there was a problem there. As I said, I think compounding the problem of inadequate systems on the front end, at least the front end was actually in the 90s, but in 2011, when this scope began, is that there was turnover, I'm told, amongst very important members of the administration responsible for various aspects of this project, or these projects, plural. So when you lose key people and you don't have a system in place, that the guys coming in after them have a problem. And furthermore, there are different departments handling different elements. Public Works had a piece, Parks had a piece, and CEDO had a piece. All God's children got a piece. So, that adds to the complexity and challenge of coordinating all that activity.
Any other questions for the auditor? We've got several more witnesses. Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And we're going to be looking at all of this year, so you will hear more from us. Catherine Shad, there you are.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm the leader of this Burlington band. I am probably a new face to many of you. I am the Chief Administrative Officer for the city of Burlington. And I had the privilege of starting in this job 3 weeks before COVID. So I already knew it was going to be challenging, but I didn't know how challenging.
Burlington? No.
That's the dream.
Did TIF pay to build that bridge?
Yes, this is our success story. No, I was watching on YouTube earlier and I heard your Madam Chair critiquing people's backgrounds, and mine wasn't very good. So I had to spend a little bit of time.
Like this one. This is not
whopping it.
Old. This is
That's
mellow.
right.
Friday afternoon, mellow is good.
Thank you.
Okay, this is your chance to tell the city side here.
Thank you. Well, first, I do want to start out by thanking the state auditor and the entire office. He mentioned it was a long, complicated audit. We do agree with that, but we do agree it was really a helpful collaborative process, and we worked hand in hand with the office for well over a year. No one wants to repeat that, but it was a really respectful process, going through a lot of complicated work together. It is unfortunate, but not surprising to us that there were some serious mistakes uncovered. as we have talked about, the audit spans a long period of time, starting FY11 to FY21. It is the oldest and probably most complicated TIF district in Vermont. And probably everyone in the room is familiar with what was happening in Burlington at around this time. 2011, 2012, Moreau comes into office, and the first city audit shows some serious financial issues. So ever since that time, the mayor and city council have been working on cleaning up financial systems. So that kind of work was happening. I get hired right before COVID, and as Doug alluded to, one of the first things I did was bring on a consulting firm who got us set up with project accounting. But at that point, it became obvious that I was going to need to build the plane as we were flying it. Then the pandemic came. And so as we were in the middle of all of these important changes, the audit started. So moving forward, we have hired MuniCap. They're a firm based out of Columbia, Maryland, but they are a nationally recognized public finance consulting firm. And they are helping us to build those systems that the state auditor recognized were missing, so that there's clear communication on the steps that are required to successfully manage the TIF, and that we have all of those policies, standard operating procedures. You know, it's not glamorous, but it's the important backbone of successfully managing the TIF, of having good records for the next audit. And when there is inevitably more turnover of staff, then there is something to hand to the new people. We have hired, I agree with what Doug said, that turnover of staff was an issue, but to put kind of a finer point on it, it's also that we didn't have staff. So we're fully staffed now, and we have 2 new senior accountants. And I was interested in the question about the complexity of the TIF and what it takes to manage it, because in our experience, it does take significant staff time and resources to be able to do that well. But now we have those resources. And furthermore, we have implemented and are working with an independent trustee. So all of our TIF funds are totally segregated in a separate account. So TIF funds are separated from all the other city funds. So I can't say that we're really, really excited about the future downtown TIF audit, but all of those systems are going to make it a much smoother process. The report does include the 13 recommendations that the auditor made for the city. Those are on table 9. Then you can see our kind of point-by-point response. That's in Appendix 8 of how we'll address those. So I'm not gonna go through those in detail. You can ask me questions. I'm only gonna say maybe 3 more minutes worth of stuff and get to questions, because I don't want you guys to be stuck with frozen cars. But I did want to comment on the recommendations that the auditor made to you. There are 3 of them in table 11. And one of them was to amend the statute to specify whether non-compliance with public information or a public vote the procedural requirements could invalidate that vote. That's something that came up for us in this audit. But our position is that there is existing statute and case law around invalidating a vote. So there's not a need for the legislature to single TIF out by amending the statute in this way. That's already handled. So the second recommendation is clarifying whether the excess educational tax increment is to be distributed to the Ed Fund at the end of FY25. We don't think this needs clarifying because we didn't create a new TIF district. This is simply an extension of a portion of the district. So it's clear to us that the same assumptions for our current district apply in this extension. It's also clear to VEPSI's attorney who has concurred with that opinion. Last but not least, recommendation 3 was to clarify some of the components of the tax increment calculation for the 3 parcels starting in FY26. That is another item we do not think needs clarifying. We intend to continue to use the 2010 OTV, continue operating under our existing TIF assumptions, and if changes are needed, that's something we can work out directly with the tax department. I am done.
It's a lot longer to go through, so.
I think there is, I am speaking for our group. So unless I missed anything, we are just available for questions and you shouldn't expect to hear from anyone else.
No one else, okay. Well, that will help. Senator Rom, you have a question.
So I'm looking at I think I'm looking at the auditor's report, objective 2B. I don't even know, page 27. So, you know, we were talking about the decade-long span that this audit covers, and that the $1 million unauthorized use was in 2014 and 2015. And as systems were reviewed internal to the city, was there a reason that that wasn't uncovered before this audit? I mean, that is sort of in the middle of this period that you're talking about of fixing financial controls. Are there other internal mechanisms for looking back and catching these things? And at this point, what does it look like to repay that? If the taxpayers didn't authorize the use of that money, where does it, when it comes from the general fund, it's still Burlington taxpayers, it sounds like, that are covering the cost of that. So what's the plan moving forward for something like that? Because that does seem problematic.
The core problem, thank you for the question. The core problem is that we didn't have project accounting at that time. So there wasn't a way to track, to say we had, I'm going to use not the exact right numbers, but simple numbers for this, that we had $10 million for the bike path. And no matter which department was spending that money and the receipts were coming in, remember the spaghetti map, from wherever and coming off of the $10 million. That is a very simple sounding concept, and yet actually challenging to implement in city government. That is what we have now. We didn't have it in 2014 and 2015. We did, in fact, find this before the state auditor. However, it wasn't until when I mentioned in 2020, we started that project accounting exercise, and until that true up happened. You had another part of your question, which was how we are repaying it. and that is, we have some money, as the auditor alluded to, that again, due to kind of a lack of this project accounting, there was almost $500,000 that was mistakenly paid for by the general fund for Waterfront Access North. And so there was money left over in there that can be paid towards this. And then there's $500,000 that does need to come from the general fund. That will come from the unassigned fund balance or our rainy day fund, which is above our targets. So while unfortunate, does not affect the tax rate, does not affect operations of city government or city services. Richard, what else did I miss or should I clarify?
Can I clarify? You said
Yes.
a true up happened in 2020 with the money that was not properly accounted for, meaning the money was paid back to the TIF fund in 2020. What's the difference between a true up and the auditor finding it and agreeing now that it's owed?
The process of that truing up began in 2020. I'm not the person who did it, so I don't know exactly which project was done which, and I'll turn it over to Richard, who may know, although it was a colleague who's not here who managed that process. But there were the projects. I'm not explaining it well. Richard, let me turn it over to you.
I think my understanding of how this occurred was back in 2014, before we ever bonded for our waterfront PIAP projects. Monies were advanced into those projects and not properly tracked in our TIF fund. And the auditors had begun the process of identifying this as in our project accounting as needing to true up these funds because they didn't appear to be lining up. That was how Catherine went about trying to bring people on board to sort all this out. But the final numbers and the reversals that needed to occur, because these monies were advanced and never properly booked to the TIF fund thereafter. So the monies were spent, and in fact, half of them were still residing in the project account unspent because they had been advanced. So half of that can be repaid. The other half on the bike path was over budget. And because of personnel transfers that the audit revealed, they never trued that up to identify the fact that monies that had been advanced into the bike path had overspent and needed to be paid for by the general fund in order to true up those accounts. So the audit revealed this, but none of these things were ever booked against TIF. And it would have, at the final wrapping up of our TIF district, it would have been revealed that we had to return all this money because they hadn't been properly booked to TIF, and the advances hadn't ever been trued up. So I think we appreciate Mr. Hoffer's sorting this all out. It would have taken, it would have done it on its own through the course of bringing in these project accountants, but it's all being dealt with and the monies are being returned. I don't know if that makes sense, but I would just say we advanced the money. didn't account for it properly. It had to be returned. It's been identified and the audit is needing to be returned.
Helpful, thank you, Richard.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just looking through the report.
Well, we will,
There you go.
okay, Senator Chitton.
So Catherine, I was trying to follow your calendar, your rebuttals to the auditor's reports or recommendations to the legislature, but I didn't take furious enough notes. I hope that you're submitting some written responses that we can process afterwards as we look at these 3 recommendations.
Absolutely, I'd be pleased to do that.
Okay. Any other questions, any other comments? Okay. Thank you. We will have you in, I think we'll be looking more at TIFs than mini TIFs or project-based TIFs as we go through this year. So, you know, looking to learn from you as we go forward about things that would make the whole process better. So thank you. Thank you, Auditor Hopper. And everybody stay warm. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee, that's it. Trying to get you out when it's warm or not as cold as quite yet. And we will see you on Tuesday. We'll keep working our way through this. So they are looking in the house at the non-homestead. We have homestead, non-homestead property. They are looking at getting more granular in those definitions. And they are looking at other sources. That has also been suggested, yes. So, or having the state take over the reappraisal process. I still haven't found out. I'm gonna try and find out maybe Tuesday next week. What's gonna happen to individual tax bills because of this whole CLA and maybe nothing if they don't enforce a CLA penalty this year. But then there's the person whose house was worth $200,000 last year and was covered, and this year it's worth $500,000, and they may be getting hit with a tax bill even if they're on a fixed income. So I want to check that out. But if reappraisals aren't done, those may still be on the books I think they are, is the old appraisal. So, and if we can put the CLA penalty in abeyance while we work this out, that might. I know it's there, if you are less than, I forget the percentages from what the tax department says your appraisal should be. If you're below, if you're 20% below, or I think 20% above, they do an automatic adjustment to bring you in line, which frequently causes your tax bills to go up because your house is now worth more than it was before. And I know there was a lot of.
It's a true up.
Yeah, it's a true up. But this year, everybody's houses, usually we have 3 or 4 that are out of compliance. There's 34 this year. The rapid increase in the house market has just caused this to hit almost everyone in the state. So we're gonna look at it just to make sure. Some of your people, senators' houses were worth $50,000 last year, are probably worth 200 this year.
Well, the theory though is that if everyone's CLA goes up, then
Everyone's tax rate can go down.
yes, right.
Never works out that way for everybody.
How does
There's
it
too
not
many
work out?
reappraisals.
How does it not work out?
Well, if you assume that all houses and all businesses, everything goes up the same amount.
Businesses and houses.
No, but,
Never happened.
no, but if the grand list rises this much and you only need to raise the same amount of money as last year, then your tax rate could go down to raise the same amount. Was it the denominator you made bigger? Yes. So you get a lower tax rate. But tax spending is gonna go up just because of inflation. I'm more worried about my local school that's put in a 1.5% budget increase when you know they're gonna be paying a lot more than that for fuel and eventually salaries and transportation and everything else. So your schools are probably gonna go up with inflation somewhere.
If that wouldn't be a 1.5% increase.
I don't know. That's what I wanna find out
Well, that's,
I
so
want-
good, be good to find that out.
before the tax bills go out.
Yeah, so Burlington went through reappraisal right through the pandemic, and two ways that I was called out for claims that I made, that it should be revenue neutral and that it should be level. Is two factors: that when a house previously was assessed at less than $400,000 and you're income sensitized and you go up to 550,000 or 600,000, an additional 150K doesn't get the same income sensitization, so people's taxes went up when the value went up. And the other one that was a bit of a surprise that we had a lot of debate on in council is we have a penny on the tax rate, open space fund, that is not prorated and it's not adjusted. So when our total grand list went up by almost 35–40%, it drew in rather than 300K, 400K in taxes, and that was spread off everybody's tax bills to tax it too. Does that make sense? So there's these little things.
If it were a theory in a textbook, all boats would float at the same rate. But and sometimes some housing goes up more than other housing. And if your businesses go down, then they're going to be taxed less and more of that burden falls on the residential.
And we're looking at ways to address that.
We're first trying to figure out if anything is happening. And then what we have to do, because this is extreme. We have a 3-year rolling adjustment for, you have one major sale in town and we roll that out over 3 years. That may, and we do the same with decreases in your grand list. If National Life moved out of town, I don't want to think of what would happen to my taxes, since I think they pay a third of the city's taxes. So we roll those big changes down so that, especially in a small town, if your major employer closes, you're in big trouble. I don't know if something this large, we've never had, there's been individual sales, but there's never been this huge a rise pretty much across the board. I mean, from three or four towns out of compliance to 34 is a huge jump. And they can't get appraisers to appraise.
Because there just aren't any.
There aren't. And they aren't selling out to a house with 50 tax. Not when they can do one with 5,000. So apparently the state has come into the house and is talking about perhaps the state taking over appraisals. We will hear. Okay.